Okay, let's dive straight into this. Today, we're unpacking an explainer that targets something literally everyone chases but kind of struggles to fully grasp: true confidence. We're going to break down how to stop relying on fragile external validation, because let's face it, that's a trap, and instead figure out how to build a genuinely unbreakable identity from the inside out. Get ready, because this is a total paradigm shift. So take a second and really chew on this. Who are you when everything goes wrong? Think about it. When the external stuff we lean on so heavily, the money, the looks, the constant praise at work, when all of that suddenly vanishes, what's left? If your confidence completely collapses the second those things are stripped away, well, you're definitely not alone, but it does mean your foundation, it's basically built on sand.
And that brings us to the fragility of confidence and what actually happens when the applause stops.
Look, society works really hard to sell us this myth that confidence is all about our external identity. We're told it's tied to winning, climbing the ladder, looking flawless, or just chasing temporary highs like social media likes. But leaning on those unstable factors, that just creates a super fragile ego. I mean, if your worth is entirely wrapped up in how you look, what happens when you age? If it's all about your job title, what happens when you hit a career roadblock? You emotionally crash, simply because the conditions changed. But an internal identity, that is a whole different ballgame. That's built on your core values, your personal growth, and your self-respect. True psychological grit isn't showing off when life is a breeze. It's revealed in how you handle failure, criticism, and all that messy uncertainty.
There's a great quote here that says, "The deepest level of confidence is not based on temporary emotions or achievements. It is based on identity." Let that marinate for a second. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that real, unshakable confidence doesn't just ride the roller coaster of your daily wins and losses. We really need to stop chasing fleeting emotions and start looking at the psychological engine running the whole show, who you fundamentally believe you are. Which leads us perfectly into defining that internal identity and answering the big question, who am I? Grasping this is going to completely flip how you look at your own behavior. Simply put, identity is just the mental answer to who am I? It's the collection of beliefs you've gathered about yourself over time. Every single one of us carries this internal blueprint, and it quietly dictates your habits, your emotional triggers, and your choices. Think about a kid who gets praised for trying hard. They naturally develop an identity rooted in confidence. On the flip side, a kid who's constantly criticized ends up with an identity tangled in insecurity. Those repeated early experiences, they literally turn into our self-definitions. And it's wild to see the massive internal shift that happens when you change that foundation. A weak identity is always looking outward, constantly wondering, am I impressive enough, or do these people approve of me? But a strong identity? The focus flips entirely inward. The questions become, am I growing? And am I respecting myself? Confident people just get that criticism doesn't suddenly erase their worth. They don't need a room full of applause just to emotionally survive. This brings us to the identity behavior loop, where your repetition literally becomes your reality. See, identity isn't just some static mood you wake up with. It's a highly active, ongoing psychological cycle. The phrase identity silently controls behavior is so punchy because it hits the nail right on the head. People almost never act outside the boundaries of who they think they are. Your brain is essentially a machine craving consistency between your beliefs and your actions. If you deep down believe you're lazy, your brain is going to unconsciously steer you toward behaviors that prove it. So here's how that loop plays out in real life. First, it kicks off with your beliefs. Second, those beliefs drive your actions. Third, the actions get you results. And fourth, those results circle right back to reinforce the original beliefs. And honestly, the most amazing part of this loop is that it proves you aren't just stuck with the identity you were born with. It's built and rebuilt through repetition. Every single thing you do acts as evidence to your brain of who you really are. Let's look at a quick example. Imagine someone who firmly believes, I'm just incredibly socially awkward. Naturally, that belief triggers nervous behavior. The nervous behavior leads to a super uncomfortable interaction. And boom, that interaction is all the proof they need to reinforce the belief that they're awkward. Round and round it goes. But what if they flip the script? If they start with the belief, I can actually improve my social skills, that spark of belief creates a little courage. Courage leads to practice. Practice leads to smoother conversations. And suddenly, their identity gets stronger through positive repetition. Now, what's really fascinating here is how easily temporary experiences can morph into permanent beliefs. The trap we fall into is confusing one single bad moment with our entire identity. We take a negative label and basically lock ourselves in a mental prison. The absolute game changer is learning the difference between saying, I experienced a failure, and I am a failure. One is just something that happened. The other, that's a life sentence.
Which brings us to the crucible, how pain, discipline, and authenticity actually forge who we are. Things like waking up early, hitting the gym, tackling the hard tasks, reining in your impulses, leaning into discomfort. These are absolutely not just trendy productivity hacks. Discipline is actually an identity builder. Every time you push through and do the hard thing, you're sending a loud and clear message to your brain: I am someone who follows through. You're proving you have internal control. You are literally showing your mind, hey, I respect myself. Now, it's totally human nature to dodge pain at all cost. But here's the reality. An unbreakable identity is not built while you're just sitting in comfort. It is built by surviving adversity over and over again. Hardship actually acts like a mirror for your hidden strengths. Dealing with rejection, that builds your emotional armor. Pushing past fear, that builds pure courage. Psychologically speaking, pain forces you to adapt and discover the person you truly are beneath all the surface level stuff. And a huge part of surviving that adversity is just dropping the act. We've all felt the absolute emotional drain of performing socially. Trying to dazzle everyone, fit into the mold, hiding who we really are, it just creates this massive, exhausting inner conflict. But contrast that with actual authenticity. Speaking your truth, drawing firm boundaries, being totally okay with your imperfections. It's amazing how true confidence just naturally blossoms the second you stop trying to chameleon your way through every room you walk into. So let's get into the blueprint. How do we actually build this unbreakable self? If you're currently lugging around an old, damaged identity, maybe you think you're fundamentally weak or just unlucky because of a rough past, you can absolutely rewrite that script. Step 1, you got to become hyper-aware of those limiting beliefs. Step 2, aggressively challenge them. Step 3, start acting differently and keep doing it. And step 4, collect those new experiences. Say you're terrified of public speaking. You slowly build a totally new identity just by getting up there and speaking again and again. Your brain eventually goes, oh, wow, I guess I'm becoming someone who can handle this. You are literally hacking your identity through your behavior. Let's rapid fire 7 actionable steps you can use to fortify your identity right now. First up, keep promises to yourself. That's how you build self-trust. Second, build up your discipline with small, daily repeated actions. Third, stop with the negative labeling. Decouple your behavior from your actual worth. Fourth, practice raw authenticity instead of just performing for a crowd. Fifth, seek out challenges regularly because friction creates strength. Sixth, set crystal clear personal standards so you always know exactly what you stand for. And finally, number 7, and this one is huge, surround yourself with growth. Your environment is a massive influence on your identity, so get yourself around supportive people and build constructive habits. All of this points to one undeniable truth. Confidence becomes permanent the moment it becomes part of your identity. Look, life is always going to throw curveballs. Uncertainty, criticism, rejection, that stuff is completely unavoidable. But when you are fiercely grounded on the inside, your strength won't shatter over a temporary failure or someone else's random opinion. You'll just trust your own ability to adapt, bounce back, and keep pushing forward. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Visualize your future self. Who do you actually want to become? How does that future version of you think? How do they navigate the hard stuff? What kind of personal standards do they refuse to compromise on? You have the ultimate power to intentionally construct your own psychology. It is time to stop drifting emotionally. Decide who you want to be and start feeding your brain the daily evidence it needs to believe it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I challenge you to start building that unbreakable identity today.